Yo, what's good everyone? It has been a while since I made a lens review video, and it just made me think about all of the lenses that I've bought and sold over the years. Pause the video and let me know your answer in the comments below. If you had to start over, what camera and what lens would you buy first? If I had to start over, this is the first lens I would buy. The Samyang 35mm f1.4 is one of my most used lenses in the E-mount system. Look at all of the different types of shots that you can capture with just this one lens. I've used it for travel photography, landscapes, street, portraits, product photography, and pretty much any scenario you can think of. You can also find this lens under the Rokinon brand name, and it is the exact same lens, just different names depending on what region you are in. In the box, you get this soft cloth carrying pouch, the lens, a lens hood, and lens cap. That's pretty much it. So I bought this lens years ago, back when I was still shooting with the original Sony a7, and it has since been in my camera bag 99% of the time. But before you consider buying it, there are a few things you should know because this lens does have its quirks. I will go into all the details in this in-depth, long-term review of the Samyang 35mm f1.4. Let's start off with the build quality. The design of this lens is simple and minimal. It is pretty much just a metal tube without any knobs or switches. Most of the barrel is taken up by this wide focus ring that turns smoothly with little resistance. The silver and red rings add a bit of personality and breaks up the metallic black surface. As you can see, the finish has held up really well, especially considering I have shot in all kinds of conditions with this lens. Taking off the large lens hood exposes the front element with a 67mm filter thread. Unfortunately, it is not weather sealed, but that is a premium feature that you don't really see in this price point. The Samyang 35mm f1.4 has great optical performance and I have no real complaints. Overall, I am very impressed with the sharpness. Even on the A7R4, I shoot wide open most of the time just because it is that good. And even though this lens came out years ago, it can still resolve fine details from the 61-megapixel sensor. Moving on, the flare resistance is pretty weak. Worst case scenario, you can get green and red flares that wash out the image, but usually it's not nearly that bad. Many people may see this as a negative, but for my shooting style, I actually quite like the odd color casts and lens flares that this lens produces. These imperfections remind me of older glass, before this trend of optical perfection that came with high megapixel cameras. This lens produces images with a certain feel and character, which is a nice change from the clinical look that modern glass often has. Adding to the character, the sunstars are also pretty nice from f11 and get more defined when you stop down to f16. Like sharpness, the bokeh of this lens is another strong suit. The bokeh is generally very smooth and creamy. You can see in these example photos just how nice the transition to the out of focus areas are. So this lens is really great for portraiture or product photography or any other scenario where you need to isolate your subject. One of the main reasons why I picked an f1.4 lens over an f1.8 is to get more depth of field for background separation. Unfortunately, this lens does suffer from strong chromatic aberration, especially in backlit scenarios. If you found this video helpful so far, hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you want to support my channel. Also, send this video to your friends who may be looking to buy a new lens but they're not sure which one to get. Alright, moving on to autofocus. I mostly shoot in AFC and this lens focuses very quickly on the A7 III and A7R4. However, there are times where it will hunt back and forth and it can't lock onto anything. Usually all it takes is recomposing the image and then it's good to go. Another con is that the AF motor is pretty loud and you will hear it in video. Speaking of video, almost all of my YouTube videos have been shot with the Samyang 35mm f1.4. Except this one, of course, because the lens is right here. But I just love the way that it looks and how it can throw my background out of focus without needing much depth. But I would not recommend this lens if you are shooting video and need autofocus for moving subjects due to the loud AF motor and the possibility of hunting. For stills, this is more than adequate, and I shoot walking around on the street with this lens all the time. The Samyang 35 1.4 weighs roughly 1.5 pounds and is 4.5 inches tall. It can frequently be found for around $500 USD and is much lower on the used market. Its native competitor used to only be the Zeiss 35 1.4, which is roughly the same size and weight as the Samyang, but much more expensive. However, Sony did announce the new 35 1.4 G Master, and it is smaller and lighter, but still more expensive than the Samyang. Third-party offerings include Sigma's 35 1.4 Art, which is also similar in build and only a few $100s more. Of course, there are a ton of other 35mm lenses available for the E-mount system, ranging from f1.2 to 2.8. But this video is specifically about the 35 1.4, so I'm not going to go into any detail about the other lenses. In conclusion, this lens is very special. I don't think you will find a better value wide aperture lens for the Sony E-mount system. I know that focal lengths are subjective and some may prefer a 24 or a 50. But 35 is in that sweet spot where it's versatile enough for pretty much any scenario you want to use it for. Especially for around $500 brand new and under $300 on the used market, you'll be hard pressed to find any other lens that can challenge this 35mm f1.4. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.